The speaker's biodata is in front of you. He's has had a very distinguished career. It seems luckily much focused on South American studies, which seems to be rare for his ministry, which posts such experts to other remote places where they can't use their expertise. So, and he's also been trying to bring Latin American studies sort of home to us in India in a much more accessible sense. Probably, it's so nice to see young people here. I think this should be the start of the expanding of horizons. So he has written a great deal on Latin America. I'd be really interested to know what Malgudi to Macondo is all about. But we'll leave it to him to write his own script and deliver his own lecture. And we look forward to this talk very, very much. So thank you a lot for accepting our invitation. And thank you all for coming. And please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The topic is Cuento Chino in the land of magical realism. Cuento Chino in Spanish language means Chinese story. But in Latin America, it has got a negative connotation. It is a tall tale, exaggeration, difficult to believe story. In short, just bullshit. There is an Argentine film called Cuento Chino, same title. The main actor in that is Ricardo Darín, the famous actor of Argentina. The opening scene in the film is like this. There's a Chinese young man. He is singing romantically to his beloved, sitting in a boat in a lake, very serene, calm, romantic. And then he stops the song and goes to the other side of the boat to take out a ring which he was hiding there to present to his lover. He picks up the ring, and when he starts moving towards the other side of the boat to his lover, suddenly a cow falls from the sky and crushes his lover to death instantly. The plane was carrying some illegal cows, and there was some turbulence problems, and they wanted to reduce the weight, so the pilot ejected one of the cows. This Argentine protagonist in the film, he read this news, and he is a collector of this kind of freak, weird stories from around the world. So he adds to his press clipping. After some months, he's got another hobby, and that is to watch planes. So on a weekend, he goes to the airport in Buenos Aires, and when he was watching the plane, suddenly a taxi comes going fast and stops screeching, and they push out a guy, throw him out, and it goes away. It's a Chinese guy, and he's wounded, so he goes and helps him and tries to talk to him. That guy speaks only in Chinese, he doesn't know any Spanish. And then he takes him in his car, gives him first aid and then food, and then try to ask him where he wants to go. And he has written the address of his uncle in his arm here. And so the next day he takes him to that address. They say there's no one there. And then he goes to the nearby Chinese shop. They interpret. They say, oh, they have gone to some other place. So he goes there. So like that, he goes around visiting a few hundred shops. And he stuck with this Chinese guy for a few months, become very friendly. And then one day this Chinese guy looks at his press clippings and sees his picture. So it is the same guy who lost his lover when the cow fell. So the Argentine, who thought China was a distant place and this was a freak weird accident somewhere, suddenly is face to face with the protagonist of that story. And then he also discovers that in and around Buenos Aires, there are about 10,000 supermarkets run by Chinese. So he realizes that China is not a distant place, it is there face to face in front of him and around him. Now, the Latin Americans, they also like this, when in the beginning, when the China's story of rise and growth was emerging, the Latin Americans thought it was just a Cuento Chino. So they didn't take it seriously. And their skepticism was reinforced by two factors. One, the Latin Americans had got out from military dictatorship in the 80s and they were becoming reborn democracies. So they didn't like the dictatorship in China. So they didn't think that this story was going to evolve. Secondly, the Latin American image of Chinese people was poor. Because the first Chinese who had come to Latin America, they had come to work in plantations in Peru and Cuba and in the railroad and Panama Canal. So now the Latin Americans are struck by this fact. The Chinese coolies, laborers, manual laborers who came to build the Panama Canal in the beginning of the 20th century are now offering to build the Nicaragua Canal for $50 billion. If it materializes, this would be the largest ever civil construction project in the world. And the Latin Americans, they find that today China is their largest creditor, the second largest trading partner, and the most important investor. So the Latin Americans have realized that China has become a crucial part of their own story of the new Latin America of the 21st century. So there is no Latin American story now without the Chinese story in it. The GDP growth of China is to some extent dependent upon what's happening in China. They say for every 1% of the growth or decrease in the GDP of China, Latin America is impacted by 0.4% correspondingly, up or down. So now the Latin Americans have learned that Cuento Chino no es un cuento chino, es un cuento verdadero. That is, the story of China is not a Chinese story. It is a real story. Now I come to magical realism. Magical realism is the signature contribution of Latin America to the world literature. You all know that. Magical realism is basically cuento Latino. It's a Latino story. While Cuento Chino is a simple and predictable exaggeration, magical realism is more colorful, complex, and sometimes confusing. Magical realism is when the writers mix magic with realism, and you don't know which is what. They blend fantasy with facts, and you don't know what is what. In magical realism, future has already happened, and the past is going to happen. Memory is prophecy, and prophecy is memory. Supernatural becomes mundane, and the ordinary becomes extraordinary. That is magical realism. You might have read Gabriel Garcia Marquez' 100 Years of Solitude. There is one passage which explains what is magical realism. It goes like this. Jose Arcadia, the character, he enters his bedroom, closes it, and a single pistol shot is here. And then blood trickles down from the bedroom, under the door, comes to the living room, goes around, goes to the main entrance, and goes down into the street, and the blood flows along the street, turns left, turns right, turns left in another street, and then turns right angle, goes into a house, climbs up the steps of the house, goes inside the drawing room, but it doesn't affect the rugs. It goes touching on the walls, and then goes to the study room where Amaranta is giving arithmetic lessons to his son. It goes under his chair, and then goes to the pantry, and from there goes to the kitchen where Ursula is breaking 36 eggs to make bread. And she sees the blood under her feet, and she says, Holy Mother. And then she follows the bloodline. She follows it from the house to the street, goes to the house in the other street, opens the door, and finds the blood is coming, flowing from the right ear of Jose Arcadia. That is magical realism. There is a story behind this magical realism. You know, the writers, the boom writers who were into this magical realism, they did not like the reality of Latin America in the second half of the last century. This political instability, economic crisis, and social chaos. And there was military dictatorship and coups. There is an Argentine film called Ni Vivo Ni Muerto. Neither alive nor dead. But this film is based on the actual statement of the Argentine military dictator called Videla in 1979. You know, they had killed a lot of leftists, put them in jail. So in one of the press conferences when he was asked, they gave a list of people and asked, what happened to these people? Are they alive? So this Videla said, in his typical magical realism way, Ni vivo ni muerto están desaparecidos. They are not alive, not dead, and they have simply disappeared. And economic crisis hit people at all levels. There was debt default and there was hyperinflation. Like even as late as in 1989, Argentina had an inflation of 3,000%. So if you keep 100 pesos today, tomorrow it will be worth 90 pesos. So in those days, these poets and writers, and they used to go to the bar, they would order 3 beers, because if they order 1 beer, drink it, and then order the next one, the price would have gone up. They used to have a joke in those days that one can never say accurately Indian population or Latin American inflation. Because by the time you finish the sentence, both would have gone up. and there was crime and violence in the society. In fact, the writers were at the receiving end. They were persecuted, jailed, tortured, and exiled. In fact, many of the writers wrote those magical realism novels from exile. Now we will come to the entry of China into Latin America. Now, Chinese entry into Latin America came at a crucial time in the beginning of the 21st century. Now, as you might know, Latin Americans have gone through in their history of external relations various masters, patrons, and partners. In the beginning, it was Spain and Portugal, the colonial masters. Then Europe was their partner and patron. Then came the masters of Monroe Doctrine, who considered Latin America as their backyard. And they used Latin America as a battleground for their phony wars and as a playground for their games. First, there was a war on communism. Well, Uncle Sam didn't like communism, but he wanted all the Latin Americans not to like communism. And the societies were divided, and military dictatorships were propped up, and democracies were overthrown. Then there was a war on drugs. Now they say it's because of Colombia and Mexico. It is nonsense. It is a consumption-driven business. It is because of the millions of consumers in America that these guys produce and export. They don't send it to India. We don't pay $800,000 for a kilogram. It is a consumption-driven business. So if they attack the problem in US, no one will produce and export it. But then they have made a Cuento Americano, magical realism, that it is somebody's problem. It is because these guys are producing, we are consuming. And who consumes? The elite, congressmen, senators, businessmen, artists, Hollywood. And the third phony war is called the war on corruption. You might have read in the papers this car wash scandal, Petrobras scandal, the exposure of the FIFA corruption, and Panama Papers. But these are all part of a conspiracy to destabilize the region and delegitimize the leftists and bring down iconic figures like Lula. So that is part of the game. And the game they played in the 80s was called as Washington Consensus. In the 80s, when the militaries had gone back to the barracks and the new vulnerable politicians were taking over with not full confidence the reins of power, at the time, this Washington Consensus was imposed on Latin America. Neoliberalism of privatization, opening of the market for imports, investment, removal of capital controls. Now, what was the result? Poverty and inequality increased. And the Latin Americans called that as the last decade. Last decade. Década perdida. The 80s. So as a reaction to this, people voted. People like Chavez, Lula, Evo Morales, Correa, Tabaré Vázquez, Bachelet. And there was something called as pink tide. So left was re-emerging. It was at this time that the Chinese were entering Latin America. And the Chinese came with enormous appetite for food, feed, fuel, and minerals. And the prices skyrocketed. Like copper price, which was something about $1,500 a ton, went up to $8,600. Iron ore, which was going for $30, $40, shot up to $180 per ton. And Latin Americans couldn't produce enough soybeans and corns to export to China. And dollars were raining, and there was prosperity and there was boom. But the leftist leaders, except Chavez, they were smart, and particularly Lula. He said, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez said in his Nobel Prize address, a second chance for Latin America after 100 years of solitude. So Lula said, hey guys, we shouldn't go for Washington consensus or for communism or for these external ideologies. We should have our own indigenous ideology, our own model of development. And that is called as Brasilia consensus, also called as Lulaism, which is a judicious mixture of pro-poor and business-friendly policies. And they gave space for the private sector to create wealth, to create jobs. And with that money, they distributed money to the poor, conditional cash programs and so on. And with this, they emancipated 60 million people out of poverty line. And there was boom, and the economies were managed well, like external debt was brought down to something about 28% of the GDP, which is quite healthy. And inflation was brought under single digit. The macroeconomic indicators were getting healthier and stronger. And not only that, they built firewalls and they built resistance for external shocks. That is why in 2007-8, when there was the so-called global financial crisis caused by Wall Street, no Latin American bank or financial institution went bust. In fact, they bounced back from the crisis spectacularly in 2010 with a 6% GDP growth. And when the bankers in Europe and United States were hiding to avoid going to jail, in Brazil, Petrobras, the oil company of Brazil, issued an IPO for $70 billion in 2010 after the crisis. This was the world's largest IPO till then, $70 billion. And President Lula crowed, hey guys, this world's largest IPO was not issued in London, not in New York, not in Frankfurt. It was done in our own very Sao Paulo Stock Exchange. And he said, the global financial crisis was caused by these guys with blonde hair and blue eyes from the Wall Street. And the Brazilians started talking a new language. So I had asked a friend of mine at the time, how is the equation with the Americans now? He told me the story. So there was this billionaire from Texas, oil magnate, he came to Rio de Janeiro. And he fell in love with a girl from Ipanema. Proposed marriage, he said yes, and then married her, took her to Houston. And then after arrival there, the first evening, he calls her to the table and says, "Come here, sit down. I want to explain the 3 Texan rules of our marriage. Rule number 1, I'm the boss. Rule number 2, I will go out anywhere I like, anytime I like, no questions. And rule number 3, as and when I come back, whether it is 2 in the night or 3 in the early morning, food should be ready, warm on the table, and you should be there to serve." So this Garota, this girl from Ipanema, she said, "No problem. But since you have 3 Texan rules, I have got 1 Carioca rule, that is Rio de Janeiro rule." "What's that?" He said, "You see the bedroom over there? There will be sex every night at 10 in the night, whether you are there or not." So this was how the Brazilians were flying, and Lula became a global statesman, and he was even offering to mediate in the Iran crisis. Companies like Petrobras was flying high. A company called JBS, a meat company from Brazil, became the largest meat company in the world, including in the United States. Well, things don't last. The Chinese demand went down in recent years, and the prices have come down. Now, Latin American economies went through recession in 2015 and 16. 2015, they had a negative GDP growth of 1.1%, and last year 0.5%. This year they are going to grow just over 1% or so. And there have been political problems. Lula has been convicted, and empire had struck back. There had been congressional coups. Military coups are no longer fashionable. It is the congressional coups in Paraguay, in Honduras, and in Brazil. It is a combination of congressional, media, and judicial coups. Now, Latin America is trying to adjust to this new reality. But, as I said, Latin America has become more resilient. They have learned from the past mistakes, and they are going to be in future stable, except for Venezuela. No one knows what's going to happen. And the economies are going to grow, and it's not going to be the same kind of boom and bust cycles they had shown in the past. In future, it is going to be better. And it is going to be better to a large extent because of China. Now, if you take the trade, last year, Latin America's trade with China was $215 billion. Latin American exports were $113 billion. Imports were $102 billion. They have trade surplus. In fact, it has come down. In 2014, it was $264 billion.
So what are the export figures?
I'll come to
Export figure from Latin America?
113 and imports 102. And the President of China announced in January 2015 that we will double the trade to $500 billion by 2025. I'm sure they are going to do before that. China has overtaken European Union as the second largest trading partner of Latin America as a whole. And for Brazil, Peru, and Chile, China is the largest trading partner. And for other countries, number 2, number 3, in the top 5. And while China exports manufactured products, they import, as I said, soya beans and corn and crude oil and minerals. Now, there is a natural complementarity. The major exports of Latin America are these items, commodities, agricultural products, petroleum, minerals. Now, they can't export these to Europe. There is no manufacturing. There is no manufacturing in the US. And they can't export the agricultural products. There is so much of protectionist policies in Europe and the United States. So where can they export? To China and to India. And China has been the largest market for this. Like for example, out of the $70 billion of minerals which Latin America exported, 50 billion went to China. Out of the $27 billion of food items, corn, maize, corn and soybeans, out of 27 billion, 20 billion went to China. Now, China is large population and dwindling agricultural land and problems of water. So they need this. And Latin America has all these in abundance. They can bring another 40 million hectares of land under cultivation, and they can feed another 500 million people. And they can increase their export of crude oil from 4 million barrels per day now to easily about 7-8 million barrels per day. So there's a perfect complementarity. Except in the case of Mexico and Central America, it's a different story. Because this story of raw materials is South American story. In the case of Mexico and Central America, they don't have much to export except for Mexican crude oil exports. There they have trade deficit and they have concerns. Like for example, in the case of Mexico, their imports are $32 billion and exports are only $10 billion. And China, when NAFTA was formed, Mexicans thought, we are just driving distance from United States. We assemble here and take it the next day. But after the formation of NAFTA, they lost 300,000 jobs to China. Whereas here it would, the shipping time was about 8-9 hours across the border. Over there 10 days from shipping. Still China beat them. It's because in NAFTA there is a catch. So you have to import your raw materials from United States. They have these rules of origin. So if you are making garments, you have to buy the materials from United States. Whereas in China, everything is locally made. So that's why. But interestingly, Mexico has become competitive vis-a-vis China in some niche areas. One is automobiles. Now there is more investment taking place in Mexico than in China. And second, in appliances, white goods, television, refrigerator, washing machines. Mexico is the global leader. China is the largest creditor to Latin America. The cumulative credit they have given is $141 billion. Last year in 2006, they had given $21 billion, which is more than the combined total of the credit given by World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank and US Exim Bank. Now out of this $141 billion, over $100 billion have gone into energy and about $20 billion has gone into minerals. 50%, over 50% of this credit has gone to Venezuela. And the other major countries which have got this credit are Brazil, Ecuador, Argentina, and even Bolivia, a small country, have got $10 billion. But the interesting point about these credits is not just ordinary credit. It was rescue. China came as savior to Venezuela, Argentina and Ecuador, who were kind of isolated and excommunicated by the Washington Consensus Gang. and they wanted to drive them to the wall. There was a crooked judge called Thomas Grisa in New York. He caused complications. I will come to that later on the question and answer session. And forcing Argentina to pay extraordinary amount to one Wall Street guy. But the idea was that to drive all these people nuts and starve them of international financial credit and capital. And it was China, only China, which had the money and which had the willingness and which gave it readily. For example, at the height of the Petrobras scandal and crisis, Wall Streeters wanted to, because they have invested in Petrobras shares, they wanted to go junk, buy up, and then make money, which they always do. So they were squeezing Petrobras with all kinds of lawsuits. And Petrobras was desperate because they had to repay some interest and some money. And it was China which extended $10 billion. And then when these countries had problems about dollars, then there's no problem. You can use our Chinese currency. They had currency swap arrangements. The investment of China in Latin America is estimated to be $110 billion. Estimated because the Chinese are as opaque as all the other multinational corporations. Most of the investment goes through Cayman Islands and British Virgin Islands and some through Hong Kong. Over 80% of this investment from state-owned enterprises of China. Now, out of this $110 billion, over 50% has gone into Brazil. And about $16 billion have gone to Peru. And $2 billion has gone into a little country called Antigua and Barbuda. You might have heard of this. About 90,000 people, and their total GDP is $1.5 billion. So the Chinese have invested $2 billion over their GDP. But in recent years, while the older investments have been in oil and minerals, but in recent times, over 50% of the investment has gone into services, utilities, power, transmission. Like for example, the state grid of China has invested about $7 billion in the electricity sector of Brazil. But one area where the Chinese investment is conspicuously absent in agriculture. There is a reason behind that. Earlier, about 2007-8, Chinese investors came. They went to the top of the Andes Mountains and they looked around and said, "Oh, we want to buy 1 million square kilometers of agricultural land." They did this in Argentina, they did in Brazil, and they did in Uruguay. So the South Americans got so scared. Although there are, I think, about 7-8 million hectares of land in South America are owned by foreigners, Americans, Ted Turner, Benetton family from Italy, all have. But because the Chinese wanted to buy whole provinces, so all these countries, they had imposed restrictions immediately in about 2009. They said you can't buy more than 5,000 hectares, and even with lots of conditionalities. Besides this, the Chinese are into two mega investment projects. One is called Bi-Oceanic Railway from the Atlantic coast of Rio de Janeiro to the Pacific coast of Peru, about 5,000 kilometers, $10 billion project. This is going to revolutionize the movement of soya beans and corn and commodities between the east and the west. but it is not going through obviously because of the problems in Brazil. But the other project, the iconic project, is this $50 billion Nicaragua Canal project. This project is 3 times longer than the Panama Canal, twice deeper, which means it can take very large crude carriers and Chinese submarines, and $50 billion. This was announced in 2012, and the Nicaraguan Congress passed a resolution, and they started the work in December 2014. But nothing significant has happened. It seems paralyzed. But this for me is the perfect blend of Cuento Chino and magical realism. Of Chinese trying to fool the Latin American and Latin Americans trying to fool the Chinese. Now, look at the investor. The guy who is doing, who's announced this project from the Chinese side is called Wang Jing. He has 36% share in a telecom company called Xianwei, kind of shady billionaire. At one time he was worth about $10 billion and the stocks crashed and it came down to $1.1 billion, now it is stabilized. His company has no experience in large scale construction or any global operations. And when he was asked in the press conference, in fact even before people asked him, he said, I know you all don't believe that I am the one who is putting up the money. You might think that mainland China is behind me. Oh, that is not true. Now, who in the world can finance a $50 billion project except the mainland Chinese? And the Chinese foreign ministry has denied that they are not involved in this project. So that, I say, is perfect Cuento Chino. Now, this is also magical realism from the Nicaraguan side. Daniel Ortega is the most Marxist of the Marxists in Latin America. He came to power in 1979. At that time, Nicaragua had recognized Taiwan. Now, you and I would have expected this Marxist to immediately break relations with Taiwan and establish diplomatic relations with China. No, he waited till 1985, 6 years. He recognized. Then he lost power in 1990. The rightist government which came, they went back to Taiwan, and when Ortega came back to power in 2006, in fact, during his election campaign, he said he will break relations with Taiwan and he will go back to China. Campaign promise. He came to power in 2006 and he's still very happy with Taiwan, and he has not recognized mainland China. And he expects China, which he doesn't recognize, to put up $50 billion to make this project. Who is he trying to fool? Now, this is not about $50 billion, it's not about this commercial deal, it's not about connecting the two oceans through Nicaragua. Actually, it is beyond these two guys, Wang Jing and Daniel Ortega. Because this canal, which is going to be thrice longer and twice deeper, carrying very large access for very large crude carriers and submarines, Uncle Sam would never allow. In fact, when they were considering the Panama Canal, they were also looking at Nicaragua. They were competing proposals. And in the Senate committee, the Panama Canal won by 4 votes because of lobbying by a guy called William Cromwell, who did a fantastic job for $800,000, saying that, oh, Nicaragua is volcanoes and earthquakes. It was thanks to him the canal went to Panama. Otherwise, it would have gone to Nicaragua, where Vanderbilt had initially the concession for that. So when the Americans decided to build the canal in Panama, in 1914 it was inaugurated. In 1916, they signed an agreement with Nicaragua. It's called Bryan-Chamorro Treaty, under which Nicaragua gave exclusive right to develop this Nicaraguan canal to the United States. And the United States gracefully gave $3 million to Nicaragua. So no one else would touch this, because they didn't want competition to Panama Canal. And this expired in the 1970s. And the Americans did not renew it. They knew that no one is going to do this. But now that Wang Jing and Daniel Ortega think that they can do it, I think it's, as I said, it is a perfect blend of Cuento Chino and magical realism. Americans would never ever allow the Chinese to build this Nicaraguan canal. Apart from this economic side, politically, the Chinese have been more proactive in reaching out to Latin America. The Chinese president goes every year to Latin America, visits 3-4 countries. Not the Indian Prime Minister, he's too busy. Now the Indian Foreign Minister, their Foreign Minister covers so many countries. And they invite everyone, even from Costa Rica and Guatemala, they get audience over there. Despite their global agenda, which is much more hectic, much more broad than India's, they lay the red carpet for every Latin American country, small or big. And they give them gifts, they give technical assistance, they've got Confucius institutes everywhere, and they have so many Chinese scholars on Latin America speaking Spanish and Portuguese. They have embassies in every country in Latin America, and all the diplomats in the Chinese embassies, they speak Spanish or Portuguese. But it is not the case with, on the other side, Latin Americans. Latin Americans still are pro-European. They have more diplomats in Rome than in Beijing, Brazil, despite the fact that China is the biggest trading partner, and there are very few people who speak Spanish among the Latin American diplomats. But we Indians, we do even better. We have Cuento Indiano. Once when there was a vacancy in Brazil and in Japan, they sent a guy who spoke Japanese as ambassador to Brazil, and the guy who spoke Portuguese, he went as ambassador to Japan. So that is our diplomacy. The United States has been concerned with the incursion of Chinese in their backyard. Initially, they tried to throw all kinds of obstacles. It didn't work. For example, when the Chinese wanted to join the Inter-American Development Bank, they blackballed them for about a year. They wouldn't let them join the Inter-American Development Bank. But the Chinese didn't care. They just told the Latin Americans, hey, it's your problem. You want more money? Just get the Americans to agree. And finally it was done. Now, since it didn't work that way, the obstructionist part, then the Americans thought, okay, let's talk to the Chinese about Latin America. So they sent Thomas Shannon, I think, to China for bilateral dialogue on Latin America. And they had, I think, 2 rounds or so. And that also didn't lead anywhere. So now they have started telling the Latin Americans, hey guys, the Chinese grapes are very sour. So they have been bad-mouthing Chinese aid, Chinese credit, Chinese investment, saying these are harming the Latin American environment. Money is propping up poor governance, and it is helping human rights violations. The other day there was an article in New York Times. saying China's one of the biggest export to Latin America is pollution. So, you think that it is Trump is fake news. Latin Americans themselves realize the downside of China, particularly the monopoly, dominant role of China in the trade and credit and investment. And this kind of excessive dependence has its perils and problems. And China had thrown its weight around and behaved like an arrogant power. They taught lesson to the big three, Brazil, Mexico and Argentina. You know, the height of this Chinese boom, the Vale, the Brazilian iron ore company, they built these huge ships called Valemax, about 350,000 tons, huge ones to carry from Rio de Janeiro to Shanghai to China. The first thing the Chinese said, these are prohibited. We don't want these two big ships, you know, we don't have the capacity and they are going to affect our movement and traffic. It went on for 2 years or so. They just wanted the Brazilians to feel, hey, we are the buyer, we will do as we say. They did to the Mexicans. You might remember this H1N1 virus in Mexico 2009, came from Mexico. At that time, the Chinese humiliated the Mexicans. They ill-treated them. They behaved so arrogantly towards their government, to the embassy, towards the people, isolating the Mexicans and giving a very bad treatment. The Mexicans still haven't got over that. Then Argentina, which was desperately dependent upon China because Krishna was not welcome in Washington DC. And what she did was, when the Chinese goods were flooding the Argentine market, hurting their local industry, they did a little anti-dumping duties and restrictions. And the Chinese wanted to teach her a lesson. They did. China at the time was the largest importer of Argentine soya oil. Argentina is the largest exporter of soya oil in the world, and China was the largest importer. So the Chinese told the Argentines, no, something wrong with your soya oil. You know, technical specifications don't match, something contaminated. So they stopped. They were importing something about $3 billion, now it is about $300 million. So they taught a lesson to these people. So you know your place. The Latin Americans also have this problem of illegal immigration and labor from China. Whenever the Chinese come for any projects, they bring 500 legal and another 500 illegal. And many of them, they don't go back. They stay here and then the mafia also join. And, I think the Latin Americans suspect there is a conscious policy on the part of China to populate every part of the world, every part of Latin America with the Chinese. And also the Latin Americans have problems of communication with Chinese, the cultural and communication gap, because the dealings of the Chinese government and the companies are non-transparent, opaque, and so they feel very, very uncomfortable in dealing with the Chinese. So, to reduce this over-dependence on China, you look at India. Oh, here is 1.2 billion people market. Large and growing market with similar needs for imports, with similar complementarity like China with the Latin America. So what do the Indians do? We sing like Luis Fonsi and Daddy Yankee, Despacito, pasito a pasito, poquito a poquito, suave, suavecito. Not heard of this song. It's the number one song in the world now. This chart, it's been streamed over 5 billion times. The original singer was Luis Fonsi, he's a Puerto Rican singer, one of my favorites. And then Daddy Yankee was the rapper, so he joined him. And then Justin Bieber came in, he joined. So that's how it went up to 5 billion. I'm saying slow because our trade with Latin America is last year was $30 billion. 20 billion import and 10 billion export. This total trade of India with Latin America is less than China's trade with one country, Chile, $32 billion. Now, India's investment is okay, it's about $10 billion. But India's credit to Latin America is under $200 million. So they are very keen, but India is not moving, slow. But there are two things in India's favor. One, the Latin Americans look at India as a non-threatening country with a democratic system with same amount of corruption and confusion and chaos. So they feel well at home in dealing with us. And the Indians also feel comfortable in doing business with Latin America. It's the same system there. And then two sectors have sort of enhanced the image of India. One is IT. We have about 30 Indian IT and BPO companies which employ 25,000 Latin American staff from Mexico, Chile, mainly doing delivery to the same time zone, near shore, servicing to their North American clients, and also now they are getting more clients in Latin America. But the thing is, they see India as an IT power and it is providing jobs to Latin Americans. And then we get that ISET interns, so many interns coming to TCS and Infosys. So they see that it's a value addition to them. And secondly, the Indian pharmaceutical exports to Latin America is more than Chinese exports to Latin America. Last year we did $651 million, and the Chinese export was just $400+ million. And it's not just 1 year wonder. We have been consistently beating China in export of pharmaceutical formulations. Interesting thing is, 50% of the raw materials we use here in India, they come from China. So if anyone says that no, we can't compete with China in manufacturing exports, I tell them, look at what our pharma guys have done. It's wonderful. And more than that, the Indian pharma exports are seen as having contributed to the strategy of the Latin American governments, the non-profits, and the people to reduce their cost of healthcare. When I went to Brazil in 1996, there was nothing called generic medicine. The Indian health minister had invited our companies to come and enter Brazil because the multinational corporations and the local Brazilian companies wouldn't listen to him, wouldn't bring generic medicines to the market or bring down the prices. So he wanted some competition. So he invited the Indian companies to. Thanks to that, now I think about 25% of the market in Brazil is generic medicine. And the same thing happened in Chile. So they see the entry of Indian pharma companies as good for the Latin American consumers and governments to reduce the cost of healthcare. And also the Latin Americans, they like Indian yoga, meditation, gurus. There are thousands of followers over there in Latin America. I'll just give you two examples of how they have taken to this more seriously than even in India. For example, in Argentina there's a nightclub where once a month a group called Yoga Rail performs. It's a proper nightclub with 600-700 teenagers, adolescents. And this Yoga Rail band sings in pure Sanskrit, hip hop and rock and pop, And in between the songs, there's a guy who asked the audience to do meditation, yoga, and on the day they perform there is no alcohol, no smoking, no drugs, no etc. Well, I thought in India people think that yoga means retired people like me, and here they have taken it to the mainstream and to the young people. It's something remarkable. Then their following of our gurus, again they have taken to a new level. There was a Brazilian called Janderson Oliveira de Fernandes in Sao Paulo. He was getting some dreams of some guru, some white beard sitting in the Himalayas, telling him, so when you reach the age of 32, you come to India, you come to me. But he didn't make out what it was. He was just 14-year-old. So he was doing all kinds of jobs, and then he learned some alternative therapies, Chinese medicines and Indian yoga and so on. Then he got married, I think at the age of 29 or so. Then with his wife he came to India for honeymoon. And they were traveling around, and the dust and poverty and the misery, so disenchanted them. So the wife said, let's go back. And somebody said, no, before going back, why don't you, they were in Haridwar area, so why don't you go to Rishikesh? So they told the driver of the Ambassador taxi, let's climb up. So when the ambassador started climbing, and he started getting vibrations. More vibrations than the ambassador car. And they reached the top of the hill, Rishikesh, and they went into the first ashram someone introduced. And he was taken to the guru there. And when he saw him, he realized this was the same guru who came into his dream when he was 14. He fell on his feet, surrendered himself, and said goodbye to his wife. And said, I'm going to become a sannyasi. So you go back to Brazil. She went back. So he stayed there, he trained intensely for several years. Our guru is called Satchadam Ashram. It's a real authentic ashram, not one of those. And there is a fourth guru who was the one who was training this Brazilian. And he was so impressed by his devotion. And he named him as Prem Baba. Prem Baba. And anointed him as his successor. So he has become the fifth guru in Satchadam Ashram. Imagine a Brazilian, happy-go-lucky, beach-loving guy drinking what they call the Brahma beer in Rio de Janeiro, and coming and becoming an authentic and Indian guru. And it is not only for himself enlightenment. He spreads the Indian wisdom in Brazil, in Argentina, in Israel, United States. He has got ashrams everywhere. He has become a jet-setting Swamiji. So, with this kind of vibrations, the Latin Americans feel more comfortable with India, and they know that Indians don't have the capacity to threaten them or harm their industries. So I see good scope in future for India. Whatever we do, the Chinese do 20 times. But I'm sure we can do at least about 5 times more than what we can do. Thank you.